Okay, now we do have this is definitely a Beverly photograph here, Rich.
Yeah, this was taken actually up near where I live today, up on Dodge Street, and it's the corner of Somerset Avenue, and shows some kids getting on the school bus. Well, in those days, the Eastern Mass chartered out to the various cities and towns and ran school buses. They didn't do as they do today and have their own little yellow banana boat buses. They actually chartered the transit company's buses to run the school trips. So here we have this particular unit happens to be a Mack, and of course that's Mack of Mack truck fame, and they made lots and lots of buses through the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And this particular one seated 35 people, and this was photographed in 1935.
And for probably no particular reason, it was maybe a mother photographing her youngster going off to school in the
That's
morning.
exactly what it was. We actually used this picture in the North Beverly Remembered book.
Wow.
That's exactly what that was.
Wow. Does that ever point up the importance of old photographs and how they can be so useful?
If only somebody had done this with a streetcar, 20 years before, we'd have had a picture of a streetcar in North Beverly, but we won't go back into that again.
Okay, now we're moving right along here in time, 1937.
Yeah, again, this now is an ACF, American Car and Foundry unit. This is a model H-17, and again, 1937, and this seated 35 people. It is, again, a more streamlined unit than some of the earlier, boxier-looking buses. I specifically remember buses like this still being run into the 1950s. These are probably the first kinds of buses that I actually remember seeing.
Yep.
And so they were definitely used around here, sure.
Yep. 1937. 1940.
Yeah, this would be a white bus, not being white in color, but built by the White Motor Company, again, a famous truck maker. And White built many buses over the years in the 40s and 50s, and this was typical of the kind you'd see in the 40s. This was taken somewhere out around the Route 1 area in Saugus, one of the concrete overpasses here dating from the 30s with the Art Deco castings along the edge of the ridge there. But again, this would have been typical of buses that Eastern Mass would have been running in the 1940 period.
Did they have a color scheme to their...
Yeah, they had basically a bright orange, which was the same color as the trolleys were painted earlier, and it was called actually traction orange because street railways were really known as traction companies. And so that particular shade of orange was often called traction orange. It was very bright. They had a black band underneath the windows, and there was often a gold stripe along the edges of that to outline it, and then the top of the bus would have been probably silver, aluminum, to reflect the heat.
Yeah.
And the area around the windows would have been a cream color.
Yeah. So you could tell unmistakably that this was an Eastern Mass bus just by its color and appearance. Okay, 1946.
Yeah, speaking of color, we have a color photograph of this unit. This is another, this is an ACF Brill. Now that's American Car and Foundry being the ACF part of it, and Brill being one of the famous old trolley car builders. And they got together and were building buses. This is a model C36 and held 35 people. And this was taken at Campello, which is in Brockton, in 1960. And again, this shows you quite clearly the color that looked like on all the Eastern Mass buses, depending on what period of time we're talking before they changed to green. Yeah. This would have been typical.
I note that we begin to see advertisements now on the buses.
Sure, as times got tougher, they looked any way they could to make extra money, and if they weren't carrying a lot of people inside, they carried advertising outside and made money that way. Sure.
Okay. 1948 model coming up next.
Again, a Mack, and this would have been the late 40s, and Mack was producing buses like this for cities all over the country. And this would have been so typical of buses that we rode on in the 1950s on the school trips, that sort of thing. I remember riding home from school every day on buses like this. Sure.
Okay. 1949 model, and we're over in Salem Willows here. Rich.
And again, if you remember talking about Salem Willows in the trolley car episodes, Salem Willows was a park that was built by the Street Railway Company to entice people to ride the trolley cars on the weekends when they weren't riding trolley cars to work. And so this, again, was created by the Street Railway Companies. Here it has outlived the trolleys and is still being served as of July 1962, when this picture was taken, by the descendants of the streetcars, the buses.
Says here, painted green with orange stripe under the windows and an ivory above.
Right. This was the new paint scheme that evolved in the early 1960s. Eastern Mass began to paint all their buses this dark green color, and as you mentioned, with orange and cream and then a silver roof.
Yeah.
And that color scheme is carried out on the sign that we have here today in front of us.
Yeah. We might point out this was taken in 1962. As you can see by the automobiles there in the background, but it is a 1949
That's right.
model.
That's a 49 model Mack bus. That's correct.
Right. And we now go over to the North Shore Shopping Center, Rich.
Yes, here's a scene of fond remembering. If you recall, in 1958, when the shopping center was first opened, it looked nothing like it does today. It was all open air. The parking lot came right up to the edge of the mall where Sears Roebuck is today, and that's where this picture was taken. And this is a GMC bus. Again, General Motors built hundreds of thousands of buses in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And this one was taken right there at the area which is now Sears and Roebuck, and was taken in 1958, but this is a 1956 vintage bus which held 44 people.
Yeah, they all held about the same, did they not? This kind of bus, they all had 40-odd passengers.
Yeah, roughly, and of course, rush hours, you could stand another 20 or so in the aisle for short distances.
Sure, absolutely. So North Shore Shopping Center in the early days. Okay, we go out to Pleasure Island in Wakefield for this 56 model here.
Yes, Pleasure Island was, of course, going to be like a little Disneyland when it was built in about 1958 or 59 in a big swamp out behind the Colonial Hilton Inn over in Linfield or Wakefield, right on the border. And they had a huge parking lot out there which would accommodate thousands of cars, but they also had regular bus service from the local towns. And this particular shot shows a GMC bus of the Eastern Mass system, and they're right in front of the main entrance to Pleasure Island. You can see it just behind the rear of the bus with the little, I guess they were like ship's wheelhouses they used to sell tickets from. And of course that's all gone today. Every bit of that is gone. You can't even tell where it was.
With the wind.
With the wind, yeah. Or with the office park or whatever. Yeah.
Salem, Mass. Probably 1956. This is a GMC model, am I correct here?
Yeah, and again, you notice on the side of the bus, the advertising placard is promoting Pleasure Island, which we just talked about. And this was taken over at the regular bus terminal in downtown Salem at Washington Street and Lined. I guess it's pronounced Lined, L-Y-N-D-E, Lined Street. And that today still exists, but it's now, I think, offices or something. They put a second floor on the bus terminal.
Right.
And the area where the buses used to come in is now a parking lot.
Right. Okay, coming up now on some troubles developed as we well remember with the bus company. What do we have here, Rich?
Well, as you got up into the late 40s and early 50s, everybody was driving. There were very few people taking the bus, and again, a private company just couldn't make it. And here we see the picture of the Salem Bus Terminal in a newspaper clipping, and it says that they're going to sell this terminal because it's too expensive to run. They don't need it, and essentially, instead of telling you they wanted your patronage, they're telling you you can wait outdoors in the cold if you don't. If you don't want to ride our buses more than once in a while, you don't need a heated waiting room to wait in. You can stand out on the sidewalk. So it's a change in philosophy from the ride all day for $1 and the luxurious coaches with the leather seats and heated, cozy terminals. Now they're saying, hey, either support this or you're going to be out in the street.
Yeah. Well, that was the way of it, I guess, in those days. Mack model C45 GT, 1947.
Right, 41 seats, and again, this picture taken at Brockton in September of 1965. and a good color view showing the later green paint scheme. And you'll notice directly over the front wheel there the sign with the logo on it, which is one of the signs that we have today here. This is where those signs were applied on those buses. And with the Paul Revere Rider and Eastern Mass Street Railway Company in blue and gold and green and orange. And those signs were on all the buses at that particular time.
Bus shows today, Rich, are they popular?
Yeah, they have old bus collectors, like they have automobile collectors and truck collectors and military vehicle collectors and airplane collectors. There's somebody into everything. It doesn't matter what it is, somebody collects it, and buses are no exception.
So if one is interested, one can find
Oh, yes.
places to go.
Yeah, there's several motor bus historical societies. They put out regular magazines. Yep.
And we might add that the Beverly Historical Society, thanks to your efforts, has a magnificent collection growing every day down there as I see things happening down there of the bus, history of the bus transportation.
We've been very fortunate the last few years. Some people have come out of the woodwork that either used to work for the bus or trolley companies or you know, had some connection with them and had saved photographs and had given them to the society. So we've been very fortunate to add this to the collection.
Yeah. Lest we forget Beverly, we are now back in Beverly here for this next picture, a Mack model. On a date on this, Rich?
I would say, again, you know, the bus is green, so it's got to be in the early 60s. So I would say probably 62 or 63, somewhere in there.
Shall we give the folks 5 seconds to figure out where this was taken?
Right, right. If you can't tell, then you're not really from Beverly. I knew where it was immediately when I saw it because the picture had been labeled Fall River, and I said, no way. It's right down here in Beverly on Cabot Street in front of what used to be the A&P and is now Walgreens. And the Bessie Baker Playground would be behind the bus, and you can see just over the roof of the bus the old Prospect School.
Probably taken in front of Macaulay Drug today.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Now we go over to Salem, Salem, Mass, and we see the familiar Jerry's Army and Navy store on the right, so we know where we are here.
Right.
And what do we have in this photograph, Rich?
This is actually probably a continuation of the picture we just looked at because it's the same bus, it's the same number, and was taken probably on the run from Beverly to Salem. And this, as you point out, is passing Jerry's Army Navy store at the corner of Essex and North Street. And an interesting part of this, which really doesn't become significant until you point it out, is that at the left of the picture is where Lawrence Breed Walker actually lived the last years of his life, whose collection this is.
Right up on the third floor?
Right up on the fourth floor.
Fourth
the
floor.
Penthouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that has a lot of nostalgia to it because of that
Surely.
fact.
And all because of Mr. Walker comes this wonderful collection down at the Society.
Correct.
Okay. Next, we're over to Marblehead, and now we're really getting sophisticated here, Rich.
Yes, this would be a General Motors GMC, what they call a big look style bus. It's the more modern buses that we're all familiar with today that have the big forward slanting windows and the big windshield and very low slung and you know, strictly chrome and aluminum.
Yep.
And this would have been taken in June of 1962 over near Fort Sewell in Marblehead.
Okay. And again, are we still talking Eastern Mass here?
We're still talking Eastern Mass up until 1968. It was Eastern Mass. So these would have been among the last buses purchased by the Eastern Mass new.
Okay, we have two shots here, and untitled, Rich, so perhaps you could mention a word or two.
Okay, the one on the left is, again, one of the big look GM buses of the early 60s, the new configuration with the big forward slanting windows. Some of these were actually air conditioned, but they didn't work too well. After the first breakdown, that was the end of the air conditioning. Most of them weren't, and the windows actually slid open. The other picture shows one of the conventional earlier GMCs from the 1940s or 50s, and this shows it after the T had taken over. You'll see the big circle T emblem on the bus. So this would have been after 1968. But they bought out a lot of Eastern Mass's rolling stock, and until they bought a lot of new buses, we're still using the former Eastern Mass equipment with the T bolted on the side.
Now, when you say the T, Rich, what are you specifically
T
referring
is the
to?
logo which symbolizes Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, and they run the rapid transit system in Boston. They run the surface buses, and they run the surface trolley lines in the Boston area, and they also run the commuter rail.
So they have a lock on all
Right,
transportation,
right,
public transportation
right.
in this area.
They have essentially become what Eastern Mass and the Boston and Maine and the New Haven and the Boston and Albany were running independently.
Yeah. Subsidized by the taxpayer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're looking now, as we wind down our collection here, at two buses, a couple of pictures anyway of buses, as we've spotted them around town here in Beverly, and
Right.
trying to catch up with them is not always an easy task.
That's
which
right. That's right. They don't
seem
run
to-
as often as they used to, and so if you're 2 minutes late, you've missed it, and you have to wait around a couple of hours to see it again. Most of them are the brand new GMC buses, and many of them, again, were air conditioned. Some of them still work. Most of them don't.
Yeah.
There's still a few other odds and ends around from earlier years of the MBTA. There's a few AMC Generals still running.
Yeah.
There's a few Flexibles still running, but most of them are these new GMCs.
Yeah. Now, in your opinion, is it a money-losing proposition today to run the bus system?
I would think certainly around here it is, because, I mean, you look on these buses and there's one or two old ladies sitting in them, if that, and mostly when I see them, they're empty.